Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. You'll hear the legal analysis in a second. Divided Supreme Court on full display heading into birthright citizenship hearing. And as CNN, Trump uses birthright citizenship case in bid to limit judges' power. The Democrats continually lose major Supreme Court cases to President Trump. The first one was the Alien Enemies Act defeat. They eventually got a Pyrrhic victory, but in the first case with the Alien Enemies Act, what took place was the Supreme Court said you cannot challenge the challenge to a deportation hearing must take place within the state that it's currently held. So a D.C. judge couldn't now issue an injunction on a deportation hearing taking place in Texas. That was huge. That was the beginning of the end of nationwide injunctions. That happened in April. Okay, then the Alien Enemies Act was struck down, but the point is Trump got that huge victory, limiting the power of D.C. judges to block or prevent executive branch authority. This is, again, the art of the deal. Hit subscribe to this channel. In a second, you'll hear the legal analysis. President Trump is not true. He doesn't truly believe that the 14th Amendment, the way it's been interpreted, is going to be upended. What he wants is for the justices in the Supreme Court to weigh in on, even if they keep the 14th Amendment the way it is, in terms of birthright citizenship, to weigh in and prevent nationwide injunctions. The topic of nationwide injunctions is being introduced along with the birthright citizenship hearing. This is exactly what Democrats didn't want. But in their never-ending, like a moth to a flame, in their never-ending attempt to stop Trump, immunity now Trump, thank God, is protected from partisan convictions or partisan prosecutions. They wanted to convict him. The presidency got stronger with immunity. Everything Democrats turns to you-know-what, not gold, the opposite of gold. But hit subscribe, check this out, ladies and gentlemen. Media is already preparing for yet another victory. This is going to be a huge victory for Trump.
I think this needed to happen. I mean, when you're looking at some of the numbers right here, when it comes to these national injunctions, you got 12 in Obama's total two terms. You got 64 just along in Trump's first term, Biden 14 overall, and then we're already reaching, as of March 27th, 17 in this second term of Donald Trump. What do you think the courts are going to do?
I think it's very important that the Supreme Court look at these nationwide injunctions that these district courts have been issuing, because essentially what these courts are doing is they're exceeding their authority. A court can typically only issue orders and bind the parties that are before it unless you have some exceptions like class action lawsuits that are properly brought before the court. So inevitably, I think the Supreme Court will have to recognize that this is far exceeding the judiciary's authority, much like a lot of what's been going on recently. So the Supreme Court is the arbiter of that. These district court judges, until they get an order from the Supreme Court, they'll continue to do that in some of these cases. I
do like that the Supreme Court is hearing some of these cases, just because I feel like they need legal debate, especially when you're talking about things like the Aliens Enemies Act, as well as when it comes to the due process clause of the Constitution. But this birthright citizenship, this is a legal debate that is needed to happen for a long time. No one has, been risky enough to put it out there. But there is some legal precedent to say this is for former slaves. So why are we having people that come in the country illegally get the same rights?
That's exactly right. It's very interesting, and I think President Trump and the administration are very brave to bring this forward, because there's been an assumption from the late 1800s that essentially this 14th Amendment section meant that anyone born here, even to parents that are not here lawfully whatsoever, are citizens. But the case that they rely upon from 1898 actually dealt with lawful permanent residents and their child. So there's never been a specific determination about the status of children of illegal immigrants who are here.
So that case that people cite all the time, that happened to be the children of legal immigrants. Nonetheless, I don't think the Supreme Court will upend the traditional view of the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, but the Supreme Court has already set the groundwork. It's already a victory in waiting in terms of ending nationwide injunctions. If Democrats don't have nationwide injunctions, they can't do anything to stop President Trump, which is so beautiful because they don't really stand for anything but stopping Trump. It's not like Democrats disagree with a policy and then they want another policy. They're not running on legislation that would keep undocumented immigrants who potentially committed crimes or possibly part of criminal organizations in the country. See, Democrats don't have legislation right now where they're pushing and they're trying to pass legislation once they get back to the House eventually. Who knows when? Could be 26, maybe not. But they're not running on actual legislation to go through Congress to protect undocumented immigrants or undocumented immigrants that potentially committed crimes or undocumented immigrants that potentially are part of criminal organizations. They're not running on legislation. They're not running on any policy or agenda in Congress. They're only running on stopping Trump. That's it. That's their life. The life of a morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrat is to stop Trump. If Trump says breathe air and eat food and live a happy life, Democrats will say the exact opposite. Anyway, let's continue.
Not lawfully, like that case in the 1800s.
Such a good point. The former, suspected MS-13 member that is now in El Salvador has sparked a little bit of debate.
So check out this exchange.
Democrats today hate democracy, and they engaged in lawfare to stop democracy from operating. They're going and seeking out individual radical judges to try to shut down policies, and they are forum shopping like crazy. Give me any loon judge put on the bench by Obama or Biden who disagrees with the policy. There's a reason the Democrat Party is at 26% approval nationwide, because they put radical policies ahead of rule of law.
Number one, we love the democracy. The only reason there's all these injunctions, Senator Cruz, is because he's violating the Constitution.
Why don't you file them in red districts?
Senator Cruz, why? What did you just say?
Why don't you file them in red districts? Why are the Democrat attorneys general seeking out
Senator Cruz,
left-wing,
my esteemed colleague?
Klobuchar knows exactly why. Exactly why. Because if you file them in red districts, you'll get a conservative ruling. And so you can't have an AOC and Ron Wyden backed Ted Cruz, President Trump, over Amy Klobuchar and modern-day Democrats, or today's Democrats. AOC backed and sided with Ted Cruz. Say that a million times, morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrat. AOC and Ted Cruz are on the same exact page. AOC and President Trump and Ron Wyden are on the same exact page. And you heard from Ted Cruz, now you'll hear from AOC saying the exact same thing.
When you've heard the news this afternoon, a couple hours ago, what did you think?
Well, I think rulings like this, and I think we've seen from the FDA and also from activity in Congress, that some of these rulings.
By the way, this is a clip on X. I don't have X. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I have my YouTube channels. That's it. But let's continue. She says the exact same thing.
I think we've been preparing and anticipating for there being these egregious overreaches by members of the judiciary appointed by a right-wing Republican Party whose goal for a very long time was to just pack these courts with partisan judges, often underqualified or completely unqualified for their role. And so there has been thought, I believe, given to this. Senator Ron Wyden has already issued statements, for example, advising what we should do in a situation like this, which I concur, which is that I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the
AOC said the Biden administration should ignore a federal court nationwide injunction. Let's continue.
Legitimacy, and they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts. It is the justices themselves, through the deeply partisan and unfounded nature of these rulings, that are undermining their own enforcement.
So you're saying the Biden administration should ignore this court, but what does that look like? What does that actually mean?
You know, I think the interesting thing when it comes to a ruling is that it relies on enforcement. And it is up to the Biden administration to choose whether or not to enforce such a ruling.
But do we want to live in a world where a government can decide to ignor a federal court ruling?
Well, no, of course. I mean,
So Anderson Cooper did a good job in forcing AOC to back President Trump, back Ted Cruz. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. There's a victory on the horizon. It's imminent. And the oral arguments are going to be this week. We'll talk about that a lot this week. Hit subscribe. Thank you.